Alors, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar with Guy Lacroix. It's 1 o'clock now, so we will get started. So Guy will examine the economic impacts of the Quebec Parental Insurance Program 10 years after its creation. My name is Sarah Fortin, and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Coordinator for the CRDCN. Today's webinar is organized in partnership with the KICS. So we will have participants online, but also in person here in Montreal. So before I introduce our speaker for today, I just will take a few minutes to present the network for those of you who may not be familiar with us yet. Next slide, please. So the CRDCN is a partnership between a consortium of Canadian universities and Statistics Canada, supported by CERT, CIHR, and CFI. As the map shows here on this slide, it's a truly a pan-Canadian network comprising now 30 RDCs and branches across the country. Actually, one just opened this summer in northern British Columbia. So research data centers are secure computer labs where researchers with an approved project can access Statistics Canada confidential microdata from a variety of surveys, including longitudinal surveys, the census data, as well as an increasing number of administrative data sets. Actually, as of today, a new data set linking the 2000 census of population to the Discharge Abstract Database, the DAD, for 2006 up to 2009 is now available in the RDCs. Last year, more than 1,500 researchers from various disciplines have accessed an RDC, and about a third of them were graduate students. The research carried out through the network is very diverse and have helped to better understand social and economic developments affecting the whole society, but also factors affecting individual life course and well-being. This includes population aging, economic integration of immigrants, socio-economic determinants of health, income inequality, and child development, among other topics. So to know more about us, I invite you to visit our website. The address is shown here, as well as KICS website. Next slide, please. So let me introduce our speaker for today, Guy Lacroix. Many of you probably know him. He's a former academic director of the Laval branch of the KICS. He's also full professor of economics at Laval University and co-chair of the Industrial Alliance Research Chair on the economics of demographic changes. He is an expert in labor economics, health economics, and applied econometrics. He's published numerous articles throughout his career in top academic journals. So he will speak for about 45-50 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session period during the presentation. Note that all the microphones will be automatically muted during the presentation. Next slide, please. To ask a question, please write it down by clicking on the question tab on the control panel, and then write down your question in the section to reserve for that. And I will read it for you once the time comes. Next slide, please. So I just, in conclusion, like to note that all our webinars are available on YouTube, as well as the PowerPoint presentation after the actual webinar. So that's it for me now. Thank you very much, Guy, for being with us today, and the mic is now over to you.
Thank you very much. Am I standing in the right place? I'm okay?
I see you very well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, first I'd like to thank KICS for inviting me to present my work on the Qpip, the Quebec Parental Insurance Program. So today's presentation will be on the economic impacts of the program. And the outline of my presentation is the following. I will present the main parameters of Qpip, and then I'll talk about our research, how we got to do this research. And I will do a number of things. First, I'll try to measure the impact of Qpip using Quebec tax files. Next, we will look at the comparison between Quebec and the rest of Canada using Statistics Canada data. And finally, we'll look at how different households responded to the Qpip according to their income level using administrative Qpip data. And finally, I'll mention quite a few conclusions about the impact of Qpip. So, in a nutshell, what is Qpip? Well, up until 2006, all Canadians were entitled to maternal and parental leaves financed through the EI program. The implementation of Qpip was preceded by a long gestational period that lasted over 20 years. Back in 1988, anywhere between 1988 and 1996, there were quite a lot of discussions in the province about having our own parental leave program. And those demands originated from social groups, unions, community groups, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of discussions back in the 80s and 90s about implementing such a program, but nothing really much happened. Between 1996 and 2000, the Quebec government was requesting from the federal government transfers from the EI fund for maternity leave to finance its own program. And throughout these discussions, the population sort of more or less lost interest in the issue because it was mostly a relationship between Quebec government and the federal government. So finally, in between 2000 and 2006, the Quebec government initiated some legal actions in order to finance its own program through EI. So importantly, the reason I stress this is because between 2000 and 2006, not much happened in the province in terms of Qpip, and population more or less totally lost interest in the issue, given that the discussions were purely technical and there was a lot of uncertainty about the program ever being implemented. So, and it's important from an empirical point of view. I'll get back to this in a few minutes. So, in a nutshell, here are the parameters of Qpip. Those are pretty much the same today as they were back in 2006. So, the Qpip offers two different programs. One is what we call the basic plan. The other one is what we call the special plan or special program. So the basic plan more or less comprises 18 weeks of maternity leave with a replacement ratio of 70%. There's a paternity leave of 5 weeks that only, of course, dads can use. And again, that's the replacement ratio is 70%. And there are 32 weeks that can be shared amongst parents. The first 7 weeks are replaced at a 70% rate, and the next 25 weeks have a replacement ratio of 55%. Now, that's the basic plan, the most popular plan, actually. And if you look at the special plan is shorter but more generous. So the special plan comprises 15 weeks for maternity leaves at a 75% replacement rate. Paternity leaves only last 3 weeks, but again, they have a replacement rate of 75%. And there are only 25 weeks of parental leave that can be shared among spouses. The maximum insurable earnings is $72,500 per year. In 2018, $17. So what do we do in that paper? Well, the mandate we received was to do more or less a cost-benefit analysis of the program. And given the data that we had at our disposal, we could not do this. So what we settled with the government was to do an assessment of the economic impact of Qpip at the individual level in terms of employment and earnings. So the question the government wanted to ask are the following. Did Qpip influence fertility choices? For instance, the decision to have a first child, a second child, a third child, or whether older women may have been more inclined to have a first child or an additional child, and whether some may have been induced to postpone the decision to have a child given the existence of the program. And what are the economic consequences of this in terms of earnings and employment? The next question we were asked to look into was whether Qpip had a measurable impact on men and women's participation rate on the labor market, and if so, what were the consequences in terms of earning, income tax, and so on and so forth. Remember that the main thrust behind this study is to study the impact. Was it cost efficient in terms of the program costs dearly, both to employers and employees, and government wanted to know whether the impact is positive in terms of earnings and therefore in terms of income taxes paid by workers. So the question we might ask is, why me? Well, I'm a specialist in program evaluation, and somehow someone got hold of my name, and I was asked to draft a proposal by CGAP. CGAP is the governing body of our Qpip, and so they called me up and they said, can we talk about drafting a call for proposals? So we met 3 different times, 3 different occasions, and we decided that the best thing to do was to use administrative data, program data, use tax records, and used the EI coverage survey of 2002-2013 to investigate the impact of Qpip. And we also agreed that the proposal should call for the use of difference and difference estimators and regression discontinuity design, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So it turns out that since I'm pretty familiar with these methods, I was asked to do it. Instead of calling it for a proposal, I was directly asked to do it myself. So CGAP, people at CGAP, at the council, were doing a literature review once we started working on the project. And they found a PhD thesis that was written by Ankita Patnaik at Cornell University. And her thesis was an evaluation of Qpip. And she wrote a paper called Reserving Time for Daddy, Short and Long-Run Consequences of Father's Quota. Now, that paper got a lot of attention in the United States. It got a review in the New York Times, in Slate, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, et cetera. So a lot of newspapers in the States actually covered that paper. And what she does in her PhD thesis, well, is exactly what we do. She uses TASCAN data, and she used difference and difference estimators and regression discontinuity design. So what we do in that paper, in our report, is more or less replicate what she did using different methods, but using also more data than she could than she had at her disposal back then. So that's part of what we'll be doing, replicating her PhD thesis. So I asked two of my students back then to help me with that task. So Nicolas James Clavet, he's a PhD student. He should be defending his thesis in the coming weeks. He now works full-time at CGAP. And Nicolas Corneau-Tremblay, he was an MA student back then. He's now a full-time research assistant with me at Laval. So the three of us actually work on this project. So what we'll be doing is using difference and difference estimations methods. First thing we'll be doing is compare different cohorts using Quebec tax files, and we have, you'll see in a minute, we have millions of observations to look into the impact of Qpip on income, on work, on taxes, and so forth, and so on and so forth. We'll also use Quebec Canada comparison using the EI coverage survey, and there we have thousands of observations. But we have much more detailed demographic information than what we have in tax files. And finally, we'll look at the relationship between income and response to Qpip using program data that's managed by CGAP. And there we have over 500,000 observations to look at the relationship between take-up rates, duration of parental leaves, and income. Okay, that's what we'll be doing. So in order to use these methods to identify a causal impact, we need some assumptions to hold, and one of which is that the implementation of the program must sort of mimic a natural experiment or a quasi-natural experiment. What we mean by that is that the policy implementation must be unforeseen. In other words, we want to avoid individuals to adjust their behavior in anticipation of the policy implementation. And I'll show you some evidence of this in a minute. And the second one is that the change in policy must not be related to changing behavior of the population. So that again, I will argue that this is also satisfied. So the first assumption that we need to verify is whether the program was sort of occurred randomly. So here's a slide that shows you using a Google trend search the number of search through Google of Qpip, and both in English and in French, on a daily basis before and after the implementation of the program. And what you see is that before January 2006, no one on the internet was conducting searches for Qpip or Programme québécois d'assurance parentale. No one was looking at it. As of January 2006, you see a huge bump in Google searches for that program, and it more or less remains constant throughout the years. So what that shows us is that it was sort of a surprise to the population. It was unforeseen, and presumably individuals had no opportunity to adjust their behavior prior to the implementation of the program. This is taken directly from sorry, from antitapatnic thesis. I didn't do that myself. Okay, so first thing we want to look at is the comparison between two different cohorts using Quebec tax files. So first thing we want to do is, given that this graph arguably shows us that the implementation of the program was not anticipated. Another way we can look at this is look at the births across the province for different years. What I'm showing in that next slide is the probability of observing a birth in the tax files between 2005 to 2012 relative to 2004. So the omitted group here is 2004. So we use data from 2004 all the way to 2012 tax file. We have over 5 million observations, 6 million observations. We're only measuring the probability of observing a birth. And what the table shows you is that in 2005 relative to 2004, there's no statistical difference between a birth, a first birth, or irrespective of number of children. There's no, despite the fact we have 6 million observations and we're controlling for a bunch of dummy variables of age groups and income percentiles of individuals, we don't see anything. As of 2006, mind you, these are tax files, so they're not chronological. So 2006 refers to April. So 2006 is from January 2006 to April 30th, 2006. And you see that as of the implementation of the program, there's an increase in birth rates. Same thing for 2007, where the program was the full impact of the program was presumably observable. And you can see that the probability of observing a birth in the tax file slowly tapers off. But there was definitely an impact as of 2007, 2006. But in 2005, we just don't see that, okay? And again, this is consistent with this, okay? So this is another piece of evidence that we can bring to the fact that probably the implementation of Qpip was not foreseen or anticipated. So next, what we're going to do is look at two different cohorts. We're going to look at cohorts who had a first child in 2005, and we argue that this is a good counterfactual to households who had a child in 2006. So all the households who had a first child in 2005 will be our control group, and all households who had a first child in 2006 will be considered our treatment group. We don't look at any other households, so we only focus on two cohorts, and we follow them through time, okay? So this table shows you the average of different economic variables that we can measure in tax files. And the most important thing is to look at the second and fourth columns, which are the difference between the two cohorts. And what you can see is that most differences are not statistically significant, but when they are, the difference is very, very small. So what we're going to do next is focus on those two cohorts, arguing that age, income taxes are the same for the two groups. There's a difference in terms of income taxes, and a very good reason for that, that in 2006, the tax code was changed in Quebec. So I won't get into this because this is not related to the, there's something endogenous in this. So there was a change in tax code that might explain why the 2006 cohort pays a little more income tax. But otherwise, in terms of earnings, in terms of social benefits, or EI benefits, both for men and women, there are no differences between the two cohorts. So what we'll do next is look at how the income changed through time for those two cohorts, and how different earnings and participation rates on the labor market differs across those two groups. So raw data, what you see here, sorry if it's in French, but what that shows you, time zero is the birth year of the child. So it's either 2005 or 2006, depending on which cohort you belong to. So as of zero, there's a birth. And we look at the income, this is the income. So the earnings 2 years prior to giving, observing a birth. So the two cohorts are plotted on this graph, and what you can see is that 2 years prior to a birth, both cohorts had exactly the same earnings, 26,000 something. 1 year prior to the birth, both groups still have the same average earning. And during the year the birth occurs, mothers who had a birth in 2006 under Qpip have a lower earning than mothers who had a birth in 2005 with no Qpip. Now, that's understandable because we'll see in a minute that women who had a child in 2006 took longer parental leaves. So the difference between the two is highly statistically significant. Interestingly, if you look at how the income evolves after the first year of birth, you can see that women who had a child under Qpip have higher earnings than women who had a child in 2005. Those are real dollars, so they're not, it's not inflation driven. It's purely real dollars. So this is for mothers. If we look at fathers, there's no statistical difference between those two lines. Again, we plot the average income for the two cohorts 2 years prior to the birth, 1 year prior to the birth. The only statistical point that is statistically significant here is during the year of birth. We'll see in a minute that men who had a child in 2006 earn 4% less than men who had a child in 2005. All other points are not statistically different. So we'll see in a minute when we run a regression through the, those are only averages. When I show you the parameter estimates, they more or less confirm what we see in those two graphs. So we run a bunch of regressions. We use a lot of dummy variables. We use everything we can use in a tax file to control. We have regional dummies. We have age. We have, what else we have? Urban, rural. So we control for a bunch of variables. And what we find is dads, so the top panel of that table, we find that dads during the year of birth earned 4% less relative to dads who had a child in 2005. Now, those parameters are complicated because what we're doing, we're comparing the earnings during the year of birth relative to what the dads earned the year before the birth. We do this for both cohorts, and we make the first difference is the difference between the year your child is born versus the year previous. And we do this for two cohorts, and we differentiate the two cohorts. So what that is saying is that the dads who had a child in 2006 relative to 2005 had 4% less earnings than dads who had a child in 2005 relative to their own earning in 2004. So there's a change of 4% they lose relative to those fathers who had a child in 2005. We don't see any difference in the year following the birth, and we don't see any statistical difference in all the years that follow that we can track them. So using 2,400,000 observations using tax files, all we can come up with is an impact on the year the child is born, but afterwards there's nothing. And this is completely consistent with the previous slide that shows you how income earnings evolve through time. So dads under Qpip earn less only during the year the child is born, and this is entirely consistent with the fact, we'll see again in a minute, that dads in 2006 have much longer parental leaves than dads in 2005. Okay, so mothers, if you look at the lower panel of the table, mothers under Qpip earn 6% less relative to the year previous to the birth than mothers who had a birth in 2005 relative to their own earnings in 2004. So mothers on the Qpip during the year their child is born lose 6% of income relative to mothers in the previous year, non-Qpip mothers. But what's interestingly, what you see is that as of the first year, they earn on average 3.5% more relative to the year previous to the birth of their child. And for the next 5 years, they earn on average 2% more than what mothers, non-Qpip mothers, earned. So this, again, is entirely consistent with this. So what the regression is telling you is that there are no statistical differences 2 years previous to the birth, 1 year before the birth, but at birth, mothers under Qpip earn less. And they more than make up in the ensuing years. Okay? So again, there are almost no differences. UI, EI, social assistance, no statistical differences between mothers and fathers, Qpip and non-Qpip mothers and fathers. Okay, the only statistical parameter that is worth mentioning is the fact that fathers lose 1 year, mothers lose more, but they more than make up afterwards. So next, more sexy tables is a comparison between Quebec and other provinces. So I'll stick to the famous ROC expression for rest of Canada, okay, if you don't mind. So we're replicating more or less what Patnick did in her PhD thesis, but we use a longer period and we use somewhat more flexible methods. So raw data, if you look at the top graph, the top graph is showing you the take-up rates of parental leave, not maternity leave, but just parental leave. And again, for Quebec, we have more or less 300 observations per year. For the rest of Canada, we have something like, if I remember well, 10,000 observations. So the confidence band, confidence intervals around those points are relatively longer for Quebec than they are for the rest of Canada. But nevertheless, what we do see is that in 2002, so 4 years before Qpip was implemented, mothers in Quebec tended to take parental leaves more proportionately more than mothers in the rest of Canada. But the interesting point is that when the Qpip was implemented in 2006, there's a huge jump in the take-up rates. And that difference between the two curves remains constant from 2006 all the way to 2013. And again, this is only raw data. I'll show you parameter estimates in a minute that confirms this. But again, the reason why Patnick's paper was got so much attention in the United States is the bottom graph. Now that bottom graph shows you take-up rates by fathers in Quebec. And before 2006, Quebec fathers tended to use parental leaves somewhat more than fathers in the rest of Canada, 10 percentage points more on average than fathers in the rest of Canada. In 2006, their take-up rate goes all the way to 50, and it increases to 70% and keeps rising all the way through 2013. And that difference is more or less 50 percentage points, 60 percentage points between fathers in Quebec and fathers in the rest of Canada. This is what got so much attention in the United States, and presumably rightly so. So this table shows you the parameter estimates once we control for a bunch of variables. I won't go through all the details, but you do see in that table that mothers from Quebec are not statistically different from mothers in the rest of Canada prior to 2006. But as of 2007, when the program was fully implemented, mothers in Quebec are 11 to 12, 13 percentage points more likely to use parental leaves. Fathers, on the other hand, there's no statistical difference at the 5% level before 2006. And as of the implementation, the first year, their take-up rates jumped by 32%, and afterwards it picked up to 55, 60% above the take-up rates in the rest of Canada. Now, we can focus still using the data from StatScan on the duration of parental leaves. Again, mothers from Quebec tended to take longer leaves than mothers from the rest of Canada, but just a couple of weeks. That's before 2006. As of 2006, the duration of their leave just jumps to 53 or 54 weeks, which is huge, but then it just goes back where it was before the implementation of the program, and the difference between Quebec and the rest of Canada remains constant over the whole period. Mind you, in 2013, both duration in both regions of the country increase. And again, I wouldn't put too much faith in this because if I remember well, there aren't that many observations in 2013. But nevertheless, except for the year 2006, when the program was implemented, the duration of mothers in Quebec and mothers in Canada, the difference remains fairly constant to 3 weeks on average. Again, if we look at fathers in Quebec relative to fathers in the rest of Canada, again, they tended to take a bit longer leaves before 2006, but the difference increased after the implementation of Qpip to more or less 5 to 6 weeks. So fathers in Quebec take 5 to 6 weeks more than fathers in the rest of Canada. It turns out that the difference is nothing more than the daddy leave, the so-called daddy leave, the paternity leave, okay? Again, this is the next table confirms what we just saw on the graphs. Irrespective of controlling or not for variables, the regressions basically tell the same story as what the graphs were showing you. Fathers in Quebec, if you look at the last column, take on average 5 to 6 weeks more parental leave than fathers in the rest of Canada, and that is nothing more than the program, the daddy leave. Okay. So the last set of results I want to tell you about is using the Qpip administrative data. Now we're going to be focusing exclusively on parents from 2006 to 2012 who benefited from the Qpip in Quebec. So there's no comparison group here. It's only those parents who had a child after 2006. And what I want to show you is the relationship between take-up rates and income. So the top, in that figure, the top line, dotted line, are the take-up rates of mothers relative to their location in the income distribution. And what you can see is that mothers who have a very low income almost don't take any parental leave. And as their income increases, as your income increases in the income distribution, it increases linearly, and it plateaus at about 95% once you reach 40%, the 40th percentile of the income distribution. Fathers, it's more or less the same thing. Fathers in the low end of the earnings distribution are much less likely to take a parental leave, and as their income increases, they're more likely to take a parental leave. But once they reach the 80th percentile, then their take-up rates decreases significantly. Okay, this is pretty interesting. I'll show you a couple of regressions about this in a minute. This slide shows you, for fathers only, take-up rates relative to the percentile of the income distribution at different years. So in 2006, we have the blue dotted dots. That's 2006, which is the same as this one. Next, the red dots are the 2009 take-up rates by fathers relative to the percentile, income percentile. And finally, the green dots are the 2012. So what you can see, if you run a regression and put dummy variables, you'll see that the dummy variables are positive. So the whole profile is moving upwards through time. And 2012 is the last year of data we had at our disposal, but you see there's a positive trend in take-up rates. But at the bottom of the income distribution, you don't see this. And all 3 years, you can see that there's a drop, a significant drop, when we reach the 80th percentile of the income distribution. Okay. So this slide more or less shows you the same picture, but those are parameter estimates. So what we do here is regress the take-up of parental leave relative to 95 dummy variables of your income percentile. And they basically tell the same story as what I just showed you, but here we're controlling for a bunch of variables, namely household size, regional dummies, so on and so forth. There are more variables in the Qpip administrative data than in tax files, but we're still limited in terms of what we can control for. So if you look at the left-hand side of that graph, this is the difference between those who have an income higher than the 5th percentile. So those parameter estimates are dummy variables. They're parameter estimates. And the omitted group here is the 5th percentile and below. So what you see on that graph is that fathers below the 20th percentile don't use the parental leave any more than those below the 5th percentile. It's only as of the 20th percentile of income that fathers have a different behavior than from fathers in the low end of the income distribution. And the confidence band is fairly large. So there are a lot of differences between men for a given income percentile. And as you move across the income distribution, what you see is that as of the 80th percentile, the take-up rate drops, and it's fairly significant. And it drops all the way to the same level as those of the lowest 5th percentile of the income distribution. Mothers, it's more or less the same thing. Mother, it's fairly flat, and relative, all mothers above the 5th percentile of the income distribution are more likely to use a parental leave than mothers below the 5th percentile. This is, okay, finally, this is the difference between, we have a basic plan and a special plan. And those two graphs show you the difference, the choice of parents between the two plans. And interestingly, what we find here is that there's no difference for men below the 40th percentile, 30th percentile. There's no difference between men. They all more or less use the basic plan. But as you move towards the higher end of the income distribution, what you find is that fathers tend to prefer the special plan, which is more generous, but is shorter. So you have fewer weeks, but a higher replacement rate of your income. Mothers, on the other hand, the relationship is U-shaped. And what that means is that mothers that have a low income will favor the special plan, which is shorter duration, but a higher replacement rate. And you can sort of understand why. And as their income increases, the relation is fairly flat. But as women with an income above the 80th percentile, they too favor the special plan, which is shorter or more generous. So there's at the higher end of the income distribution, men and women behave similarly. Now, all these regressions are made using married couples. We did the same thing for singles. We did the same thing, and they're all wage earners. We did the same thing for self-employed, but we had so many graphs and tables that we decided not to put them in the report, but we did run all those regressions. But the more interesting story is about married couples. Okay, and finally, the duration of the parental leave more or less mimics the take-up rates. So fathers on the left-hand side don't behave any differently from fathers with low earnings, but once their earnings reach the 80th percentile, the duration of their parental leave decreases. And that more or less tells you that fathers above 80th percentile of the income distribution take the special plan. Okay? And mothers, on the other hand, well, this figure mimics this figure. Okay? In other words, mothers in the low end of the income distribution favor the special plan, and mothers at the higher end of the income distribution also favor the special plan. So therefore, their duration of their parental leave decreases as well. So it's entirely rational to behave this way. Okay. So to conclude, so what do the data say? Well, what we can say is that Qpip has had a statistically significant but modest impact on fertility. Fathers who take the daddy leave incur an additional 3% income loss during the birth year, and they never make up for this. And mothers, on the other hand, incur an additional 6% income loss, but they more than make up for this in the following years. Qpip has had an undeniable impact on take-up rates by fathers. The impact is still noticeable in 2013. And the takeaway from this is that the program has had a lot of impact for families, households in the mid-range of the income distribution. Those in the lower end of the income distribution don't really benefit from the program because they can simply not afford to go to have a 75 or 70% replacement rate of an already low income. So this is something that's people in the government are aware of. So the program is mostly beneficial for those above the 20th percentile of the income distribution. Well, if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Sure. So thank you very much. I'm inviting participants now to write your question. Please use the, you have to click the white arrow in a orange square to open the question tab, and then you just have to write it down. I'll be happy to read it for you. And I have one already, so that's great. Thank you. And the question is from Tammy Schill.
Hello, Tammy.
Tammy, hi, Tammy. Please remind me of eligibility criteria and when this changes.
Okay.
I'm thinking about how selection into the program via eligibility affects how we think about earnings and take-up rates.
Okay. Thanks for your question. I should have mentioned it earlier. In that table, you have the main parameter, Qpip parameters, and at the bottom of the table, what it indicates is that anyone who earns more than $2,000 a year is entitled to Qpip. So the bottom income is $2,000. And the maximum insurable earnings is $72,000. So self-employed, wage earners all qualify for the program. So anybody earning more than 2,000 is eligible. That's the only criteria. Nothing more.
Thank you. Here's another question from Kyonda Zhao. Do you think the inclusion of self-employment people would affect the result?
Well,
they are included.
They're not included here, but we did analyze them. The problem is a lot of the individuals we study change their status. Sometimes they are wage earners, sometimes they are self-employed. But we did run the same regressions, conditioning on the fact that the person remains self-employed all the time. And more or less, we self-employed people usually tend to prefer the special plan, of course. And so they have shorter durations, but they have high take-up rates. And they more or less behave the same parameter, almost same parameters as what you see here, except that they favor the special plan more. Yeah? And the duration is shorter. Same thing with singles. Singles, same thing. So we single mothers and fathers, we didn't have enough observation for single fathers, but single mothers, they behave like married mothers. It's exactly the same thing, but they too tend to favor the special plan more than the basic plan.
And here's another one from Rod Bojo. Hi,
Hi, Rod.
Does married include common law?
Yeah, okay. In the French version of my presentation, I don't say married, okay? So it's only...
for today that you...
Yeah, for the English version of my presentation. Yeah, it's common law households, so it doesn't. They don't have to be married. Actually, most of them are not.
Okay. And follow-up from Rod again, not a follow-up, a second one rather. Are people who are not eligible for benefit excluded from the analysis?
Yes. Yes. Well, no. Yes. When we use the tax files, we don't look. We exclude all those who earn less than 2,000. Okay. So the original regression that we did here, all the regression I showed you, they are excluded. Okay, because they don't qualify, of course. And all the tables I've shown you, they are excluded from the analysis, of course. Thanks for. I should have mentioned that. Okay.
Thank you. Do I have a question in the room? Jean Poirier.
Yes. Were there any explicit objectives of the programs in terms of demographic impact?
Good question. I presented this paper at the university last week, and the main question that was asked was this sort of a family policy, or was the government interested in impacting somehow the welfare of children? The study we're doing here is entirely an economic one. We were asked to do a cost-benefit analysis, but we couldn't do that. If you look at Patnick's thesis, she uses the General Social Survey to look at how children might have benefited from this. So the policy was certainly not one to induce households to have more children. From the outset, it was not a family policy in that sense. It was mainly a policy that whose aim was to induce fathers to get more involved in rearing children at their very young age. So this is the daddy leave, as they call it, is the main parameter in this program. And the intention of the government was to give fathers a chance to help the mother. And it turns out, I must be explicit about this, my wife was was on the board when they created that program. And if you look at the literature, you'll see that the first year the program was implemented, the cotisation, contribution by firms and individuals were way too low. They didn't expect fathers to take up their parental leave so much. So the first 4 or 5 years of the program was ran a deficit, a huge deficit. And every year the government had to put more money into the program because fathers kept increasing their take-up rates. So it really was about helping fathers take a break from work and help the mother at the very beginning. Fathers can only take the leave, the daddy leave, once the child is at home. And the parental leave, that's something else. But the father leave can only be taken once the baby arrives at home. And the problem they had with the program originally was that it was too popular. And so they had to increase the contributions both by the firms and by individuals to finance the program. So now they're running more or less a small surplus, and so they change the contribution rates every now and then to ensure that the program is self-paying.
Thank you. Here's a question from Rachel Margolis. Have you done any additional analysis about the effects on fertility other than slide 8?
No. Slide 8, the purpose of slide 8 is to show you that probably the program was not anticipated. That's the main reason why we did this. And again, the purpose of the policy was not a fertility one. The Quebec government had a fertility program back in the 1990s called the baby bonus. And this is about fathers, not about, well, and mothers, of course, but it's not about fertility. So that's why we didn't indulge too much in that issue. We did have much time, mind you, to do this analysis. So we really focused on what the government really asked us to do originally. But using the data we have, of course, we could do a lot more. But we just didn't have time to do it. Mind you, this study was conducted because the government wanted to publish a huge report on the 10th anniversary of the policy. So that was published last year in 2016. So we had a very small window to do the analysis. But in that report, I mean, we have all kinds of, we're 6 or 7 authors. And ours is more an economic one. But if you look, there are lawyers, there are sociologists, there are demographers who actually wrote papers about the program. But my take on this is purely an economic one.
Yeah. In the introduction slide for you, I think I do give the link
okay.
to this report. It's in French, but so if you can read French, you can see then read both Guy's analysis. I believe there are 2 chapters.
I have 2 chapters,
then
but
overall 8 or
9. Yeah. So yeah, if you can read French, I mean, it's
does a good overview.
And a good overview of the program, not only from an economic point of view, but also from time allocation between fathers and mothers. There's a very nice survey that was conducted by CGAP about fathers. So they asked 1,200 fathers a lot of questions about sharing, about time allocation, about how the parental leave is split between mothers and fathers. So this is on the website. If you go to the CGAP, you can. It's in French, but it's a big survey that was conducted in 2014. So 1,000 fathers responded to the survey. How that affected their relation to their mother and the child and their work. So the report is more than 150 pages, but it's a bunch of questions and a very nice statistical analysis. No regressions, just tables, but it's pretty interesting, and it conveys a lot of information that we simply cannot convey using tax files.
Thank you. There's another question from Andres Arcila. Do you have information on the type of job people have before and after the leave?
No.
Could this policy affect the type of job women and men are taking?
It could, and that question was raised on the website when I presented a paper last week. We have tax files. So when you write your tax report at the end of the year, that's about what we have. So you might change your job, you might, yes, but the takeaway from this is that you're not penalized. Even if you change your job. We don't observe this. All we know is whether you stop working. We don't even know how many hours a year you work because we only have your income. So presumably you could do that with the StatScan data. But then we have small numbers because for the Quebec sample, we have something like 250 observations or 300 observations per year. It's very little. So you cannot do very convincing statistical analyses. But no, that's unfortunate. We wish we could, but the main takeaway is that you're not penalized in terms of earnings through your career. And the likelihood of a woman dropping out of the labor market does not change with Qpip. So that was an important result that we had that the government was pleased with. It has no negative impact on participation rates, both of mothers and fathers. Well, we wish we had that data, but we just simply didn't have it. Thanks.
Question again from Rachel Margolis. Do you have any data on employers' top-ups? If so, have you analyzed it?
We didn't, but we have it. So we simply didn't have time to do it. But if we look at the Qpip data at the end, this. So we do have the administrative data. So when a household, a mother, a father, wants to have benefits, they have to bring in a lot of information from their employer. So those data are in the administrative data, the Qpip data. And fortunately, my PhD student who now works full-time at CGAP has access to that data, and we intend to pursue that analysis further in the coming weeks and months. But yes, we do have that. For instance, at the university where I'm at, the employer tops up 100%. So you end up having more or less 100% of your income for a certain period of time, but then it gradually tapers off. But yes, many employers actually do top up missing income. Very good question, but we do have the data. Okay.
So it's the next webinar.
Probably the next webinar, but again, we're not. What we're looking at here is market income. Did individuals change their behavior? Were they penalized in terms of market income? Not including everything else, but just market income. But certainly we'll carry that analysis using these administrative data.
Actually, given that the rate of replacement is higher, employers who are topping up are actually saving some money.
They're saving some money, but again, the maximum insurable earning is 72,000. So if you earn 120, you can only have 75% of 72. So that's way below what you're. So the top up won't go all the way to 120, right? So that's why you see the individuals at the higher end of the income distribution take shorter leaves and take the more generous special plan, because there's an implicit tax to them because of that ceiling of insurable earnings.
Okay, next question from Eugene Schwa. Do you have the information about the percentile of maximum insurable earnings in income distribution for men and women? I wonder if this is related to the decrease in take-up rates at the top of the income distribution.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you look at these graphs, I don't remember what the median income was, but the 80th percentile of the income distribution more or less corresponds to the maximum insurable earnings. So you're dead on. The decrease you see here is because the implicit tax kicks in. And so it becomes expensive for these workers to take long leaves because they're at the maximum insurable earnings. So the 88th percentile more or less corresponds to that maximum insurable earnings. Thanks for the comment. I should have mentioned that during my presentation.
Question from Lindsay McKay. Is Qpip considering addressing the low take-up and low duration by low-income parents? Some countries offer a flat rate. The floor could also be raised for this group?
Yes. This is something the government is fully aware of. The program is more tuned towards middle, high income earners. It is true. They're concerned with this, but at the same time, if you have a very low attachment to the labor market, it's not clear if you want to subsidize parental leave so much. We have other programs in Quebec. Daycare is pretty cheap. So the government's not convinced that they should do something about this. This is, if you look at the 20th percentile of the income distribution, this is where you more or less start paying income taxes. And so it's not clear whether they should address this, given that there are other social policies to address the issues that pertain to the lower income. But they're aware that that program is not well suited for families with low income. But I'm not convinced that this is the way to go. Other social policies are probably better tuned for their own needs. But yes, they are aware of this.
Thank you. And the question from Kyongda Zhao, and a question that I was actually wondering about myself as well. Why do you think the mother's income more than compensate 2 to 5 years after 2006? Is there some reason for this pattern?
We have no idea, but let me give you one suggestion. Data from the General Social Survey and also data from the survey I was mentioning earlier on fathers show that fathers get involved more with child caring. It could be, but then I'm pushing it because I'm focusing on tax files here, but it could be that fathers, by spending more time with their children, the mothers have more time relative to mothers in 2005 for their own career. So it could be that, and firms, mind you, something I didn't mention here, but if you look at how things changed across time, the Qpip, the daddy leave, is now a social norm. You won't find any employer arguing that this is ridiculous. So fathers now in Quebec, they all systematically take, almost all of them, take the daddy leave. A third of fathers use a parental leave. Now, the parental leave for fathers is about 13 weeks. For mothers, it's 29 on average. So a third of the fathers in Quebec not only take the daddy leave, but take 3 or 4 months of parental leave. So it could be that the way the households manage the time between spouses might be beneficial to the mother. Again, I'm pushing it because I have no reason to say this, but that's an intuition, and it's based on qualitative data, but also on survey data that you can find on the net. But certainly mothers benefit from the fathers spending more time with their children. Again, relative to mothers in 2005.
Thank you. I have no other question online. I'll leave you a minute still while I ask maybe a question to you, maybe one clarification. When you mentioned comparison with the rest of Canada, you say that, of course, the impact is obvious among fathers essentially, but you're talking about parental leave.
Yep.
And then in your explanation, you said that it's actually the daddy leave that explains the higher duration. So does it include daddy, or is it only parental leave?
No, it's everything. Okay, good question. So this difference here, we're looking at Ontario, Canada, and Quebec. So let me, where am I before that? No. Here. Okay. So the difference between fathers at the bottom of the table is it's between the proportion of fathers who have a parental leave, that includes a daddy leave and the parental leave. Okay. So the difference in the take-up rates between fathers in Canada and fathers in Quebec is about 70 percentage points. Okay. So and the duration, the difference in the duration is both. It's almost 5 weeks. But that's because a third of the fathers use a parental leave in addition to the daddy leave. So because only a third of them use a parental leave, on average the difference is more or less 5 to 6 weeks. But that's, a lot of fathers use 3 weeks, special plan, a lot of fathers use 5 weeks. So on average that would be about 4 point something weeks. Well, we see a difference of 6 weeks, more or less. That's because some of them use a parental leave as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I've got maybe one last one from Lindsay. Oh, 2 last ones. Lindsay McCabe to start. Fathers, do they take the leave alone or with the mother? I think they have to take it.
Someone just asked me.
Yeah, right.
Someone asked me the question on their website last week. It's in the data is on the CGAP's website, and I looked it up. And 40% of 60% of fathers take their leave at the same time as the mother. Okay, but it's 40% don't. So 40% of the fathers actually are at home with their child while mom is working. So yeah, but 60% of them actually take their leave with the mother.
All right, and then from Yusin Shua, is the duration including zeros or conditional on take-up?
It's conditional on take-up. I should have mentioned that as well. Thanks.
Right. So it's 2 o'clock. I guess I have no other question coming in, but thank you all for your question. It was really interesting. Makes it all the more interesting when we have questions, I guess. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, Guy, for doing this and taking the time to share your research with us. Just to mention that the next webinar is on October 12th. It's going to be about school junk food bans and the impact on young Canadians' health. And also I'd like to mention that we are in Montreal this year for our annual conference, the CRDCN annual conference. We'll be talking about inequalities on November 14 and 15. So visit our website, register. We'll be happy to welcome you in Montreal. So again, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.